With COVID, the presidential election, Senate runoffs, polarizing base camps, the Washington football team changing quarterbacks, and the Steelers still being undefeated, there is a lot to be upset about in the world right now. And I mean a lot. We've been thinking about this pain for weeks now in these midweek devotions, and we were offering angles and words and thoughts about how the church should be helping us process all of these emotions, which are a ton. And I want to do it again today. For the last 2 weeks, we've said kindness is everything, and Christians must lead right now by being salt and light. All of these are true. So today, I want to dig into that same vein, but focus on another angle. Love. Deep, agape, unconditional, holy love. Not necessarily sexual or brotherly love, but the holy, deep love of God, and why that should matter to all of us right now. In the midst of chaos, we must remember we are people called to love. There's so many verses that call us to love. We're to love our enemies, love ourselves, love our neighbors. Christians are people who are constantly called to love one another. But how do we show others and even ourselves agape love? There's not another section in Scripture that captures this energy more than 1 Corinthians 13. I want to read this text with you. This is such a reminder of who we need to be right now for ourselves, for our neighbors, for our family, and even our country. So hear these words from Scripture. We'll pause and reflect on them as we work our way through it as well. Verse 1. If I speak in the tongues of mortals and of angels, but do not have love, I'm a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have all the right words, but do not have compassion underneath, I'm a noisy gong, shattering cymbals. I'm just making noise. I mean, what undergirds our words matters more than the words. Otherwise, the words are just empty. Verse 2. If I have prophetic powers, I understand all mysteries and knowledge, and have all faith as to remove mountains, but do not have love, I'm nothing. It's as if Paul's saying that my intellect doesn't replace my need to love. I can't just outsmart you or be more well-read than you, but that it matters, but not as much as love. Intellect will never be enough. You won't ever be enough, but love will. Verse 3. If I give away all my possessions, if I hand over my body so that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. He's saying benevolence, gift giving. These are all good things, but if they don't come from a spirit of love, we gain nothing. So what is love? Well, Paul says it's this. Love is patient. Love is kind. It's not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It doesn't insist on its own way. It's not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. There is so much here, but I just want to add this. If you aren't being kind, you're not loving. If you're boastful or acting arrogant about your football team or which political candidate you follow, you aren't being loving. If you're arrogant or rude towards others who are different than you, you aren't being loving. If you're irritable towards others, you aren't being loving. If you resent others, you aren't being loving. If you rejoice in others' failures and misdeeds, you aren't being loving. If you relish in lies and mistruths, you aren't being loving. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. I mean, think of that. Love endures and hopes everything. It's always positioning itself towards the beautiful and the true and the good. Anything other isn't love. Verse 8, love never ends. But as for prophecies, they'll come to an end. As for tongues, they'll cease. As for knowledge, it'll come to an end. And verse 8 really is interesting to me. This is clearly an intellectual community that's forming in Corinth, and they're taking great pride in their knowledge. Twice now we've mentioned people who prophesy or people who possess knowledge, and Paul is reiterating that although these things are good, they will come to an end. They will not last. Love lasts. It's bigger and wider than the pursuit of knowledge. Because as much as you think you know or think you can do, there's always more you don't know and more you can't do. Look at verse 9. For we know only in part. We prophesy only in part. But when the complete comes, the partial will come to an end. I like verse 9 too. Wholeness and completeness, that's what's coming. This is a direct connection that Paul's making to the end of all things. And when the end comes, it comes to us as love. I'm a part of a community that's been formally studying together for the past several years. It's through the Institute for Conscious Being. We have focused around the work of the Enneagram. One of the load-bearing pillars of our studies together is that when we enter the world, and I'm talking as a baby, as an infant, we entered fully connected and in touch with our soul, with our essence, with God. This is pure love. Now, there's more I could say about that, but I mention this to you to say that because of this philosophy, it's completely changed the way I hear verse 11. When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became an adult, I put an end to my childish ways. Typically, what we hear here is that being childish was ignorant, and being an adult is more intellectual, more rational to understand what love is. But what if this was actually an indictment on who we've become as adults? What if Paul is saying, when I was a child, I was connected to the most divine source of love. I thought and made decisions out of that love, but when I became an adult, I severed that connection and I put an end to it. And for now, I only see in part. Verse 12. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then we will see face to face. Now I know only in part, then I will know fully, even as I have been fully known. It changes the way you hear it. At least it does for me. Who we're becoming in our egos and in our pursuit of life, that person only knows love in part. As a child, we were immersed in love, but as we grew up, we left it. And now faith, hope, and love abide, these three. And the greatest of these is love. I'm not sure 1 Corinthians 13 is rocket science, but it is timely. If we aren't loving, we aren't acting Christianly. And what the world needs right now, in the midst of all of our chaos, is for us to tap back in to divine love.